Hey folks, I'm John, also known as DorkLovesSports.
Hey guys, I'm Paul Bomba. I'm a good old friend of John's, and we're talking about Airwolf.
And this is Airwolf the Rewolf, episode 5, and we'll be talking about Proof Through the Night. So, Paul, we talked about doing some changes. How do you think we should handle this?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that we've gotten some feedback and trying to make our show as consumer friendly as possible in terms of our viewers. So we're just changing up the format a little bit. Let us know what you feel, if you like it, if you like the old format better, or if you like this one better. But we're going to start off by going through a quick summary of the episode, and then John and I have some talking points that we're going to get through, and hopefully it's fun and exciting and funny.
All right, folks, so we're going to start with a quick bullet summary of the episode. So, it starts off in a Russian lab. We see some animals getting experimented on, and then we see what appears to be a scientist comes in, pulls out a mysterious serum, opens it, and kills everyone else.
Yeah, I
During
mean, we see the serum as a deadly agent to these animals. These animals are dropping dead. Boom. All these scientists, like one guy says, "Oh, pujalosta," which is I think Russian for please or thank you or both.
Don't kill me.
And
Yeah.
oh well, you died, sucker.
Yeah. And the guy it is clear apparently that the person makes it appear as if all the gas was wasted in the horrible murder, closes up what's left, and does the bird.
That's it, and he's out of there. But we find out like really shortly that this guy is actually an American agent who is now seeking extraction. Right?
Yes, Vladimir Moses Rostov, um, and
He's an
he
old friend of Archangel, right? When they were working in the firm and they were a lower level before Moses went 22 years ago into Russia undercover. He was like boys with Archangel and saved his life.
yes we find that out in the next most important scene after that, which is when Archangel arrives at the cabin of the string fellow Hawkeye,
Mm.
and gives him a job. He's like, you have to go to Russia, right? To make this quick, hey, go to Russia, save Moses. By the way, you can't bring any guns because it's really far away. Good luck. And
And
he has a
and
family.
there's a little bit of pushback, right, from Stringfellow, who's kind of like, oh, who's this guy? And then they find out that, oh, they're boys. He's boys with Archangel. There's
Yep.
something personal there. Oh, and of course this is his buddy, but you don't even want to go look for Sinjin kind of thing.
It's
Subtext
yeah.
there.
So yep, under the level. So then in effect, he goes to Dom. We have the like, hey, this is stupid. Dom is not cool with the plan. But they jump in the helicopter and we're on our way to Russia. Um,
And to Dom's credit, he does say multiple times, like, this is a bad plan. They're on their way. He's saying this is a bad plan. They're there. He's saying this is a bad plan. So Dom, it was not on board at all, but he's the kind of guy that goes 100% if he commits to something. So he's there.
Yeah, and I think that's the rub, right? We talked before the episode, bringing you behind the scenes, people, and this is my favorite so far, and Paul's least. And
Yeah,
this this is the problem, right? It's if you can get past that, this is actually a bad plan, right? Like the like
the
you
bad plan.
you
It's
have to
bad.
you have to be able to whistle past the bad plan part. If you're gonna get stuck on the bad plan part, it's gonna be like, well, why? They're just compounding stupid, right? Like, but we'll get to that later when we do more color. Finally, though, it just gets to the point. They get to Russia. They do cool stuff. They have some moral dilemmas, but ultimately they retrieve Moses, the serum, which the killer gas being now referred to constantly as a serum is a little weird, but that's fine. We get the serum. We get a daughter and a wife,
Hmm.
and everyone makes it out. We go back to the U.S. of A. We're safe. We have a nice dinner. We make jokes about Archangel having been a womanizer, and then and then and then we have what I suspect is going to be an ending that I like and you kind of rolled your eyes about.
Yeah, and throughout all this, there's various scenes of battle. There's Russians. There's balalaika playing, and it's pretty typical TV show. Very cut and dried in terms of you got to accomplish something, and then you go out and accomplish it.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a fair summary of the episode. Like, They're going to get Moses. Moses has got a family. There's some complications, and they succeed because they're Airwolf, and it's Stringfellow Hawk, and he's just amazing. Like what he can do in a helicopter, even without any guns, is just deadly.
Yes. I should probably say, well, I don't know if it's going to show up in your 3B things, and we can always cut this later, but the action, the set piece of this episode, the like Airwolf is kick ass, is effectively the fact that like he defeats a helicopter and like several ground vehicles with like no guns, basically just hit the afterburners of Airwolf and like flying really fast past
and
things.
Being a kick-ass pilot, right? And
yeah,
and I will say this: the helicopter, the opposing helicopter, was one thing. The opposing soldiers, they just like flat out gave up. They didn't even try. It was like, you know, I don't know. I was not convinced that they had an incredibly big investment in what's going on here. You know?
No, they seem to be a little bit going through the motions. I mean, it did sort of stink of that thing like where they got there that day and they were like, "Oh man, we didn't really think about what he's going to do to the truck."
To me, it was more like, what do you mean you only hired 11 extras?
Well, to be fair,
why don't we have like 50 extras? It's all right.
To be fair, that was supposed to be a skeleton crew, right? Like the Russians weren't in that part of the place at that time because Moses is a good guy, right? So he was telling the truth. So that's just like, I'm trying to help him out. It's not the best work, but it's also like there is a certain amount of practicality to this, right? Like hiring 50 guys is a pain in the butt. Herding cats is a pain in the butt. Like I get why they wouldn't.
It was a little bit confusing because they're talking about the militia, like the local militia, and then there's actual soldiers that come later.
I think that's the militia.
I found it to be a little bit odd how we moved from these like two militia soldiers to like hours later, a whole like I guess like a platoon of guys.
Yeah, platoon. That seems platoonish.
Yeah, like 3 vehicles and a bunch of guys and 1 helicopter.
So then, Paul, it's time for our 3 big things.
All right, well, I'll go first because you asked me.
Okay.
And my first thing was, and I'm sure this is on your list, John, so don't kill me for it, was the humanization of the Russians. I think we really saw in this episode that Russians were people. They had wants, desires, they had loves, they had patriotism, and that was an honest thing. Like we weren't like these are robotic socialists or whatever it was that we normally did in the 80s, you know?
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. It's actually sort of on my list. I went more like person focused on it, so it sort of comes up in what I'll talk about probably, but like that is probably my favorite theme of the episode, certainly. Like it was so refreshing, right? Because even to this day, usually villains in an action show are going to be, there's going to be no one with the depth of the brother-in-law, right? There's going to be no one with the conflict of the daughter. It's just going to be like, those are the bad, evil people. Like, there's no nuance to it. Like, to see people being portrayed with nuance, like, it was affecting, and I thought kind of honestly surprising. I really enjoyed it. It was certainly
we heard conversations in this episode about like whether or not your country of origin or your ancestry is your nationality, and these kind of conversations were happening. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought it was cool that we were actually being articulate about these small distinctions and asking like serious questions about like what does it mean to be an American, even if you are born of Russian immigrant parents and you actually go to live in Russia, can you still be loyal? And I think the writers in this episode actually did a really good job of keeping us as viewers on the hook in terms of, do we trust Moses? Because I don't really like, I wanted to believe that he was a good guy from the get-go because we saw him with the bioweapon and we saw him, killing these other scientists.
Yeah, and honestly, like in the summary, we kind of glossed past. My bad. That the tension of the episode was very much that, like, Morella, Archangel's assistant, was there's a 50-50 chance he's been there 20 years, meaning Moses, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a chance he's turned. He has a family, he has friends, he has a life. He may have turned to the Russians, and this may all be an elaborate trap for Airwolf, because they know that the firm is working with Airwolf, right? Or they believe the Russians know that. And so the writers, as you're saying, and the performer, right, Rick Lenz, did a wonderful job of sort of like allowing you to believe that he might be a Russian, but also he might be a Russian, and I still have sympathy for the character. Like, he might be betraying America, and I might understand why he would be doing it. And I thought there was a line that I wrote down that was, "I am American by birth and political conviction.
Mm-hmm.
I am Russian. My heart and soul are Russian." And it was lovely. It was a good line.
And we see that, right? We see the
Mhm.
Russians sitting around the table, drinking vodka, playing music, singing to each other, cooking as a family, and uh, it made me think of the Three Sisters, which is a very famous Chekhov play where there are these three sisters. The youngest of the sisters, Nina, wants to make something of her life, but there's all these suitors for her, several of which are military soldiers. So these guys come to the house. There's like a lot of military guys in the house. Everybody's hanging around. It's just that kind of very Russian thing that
Yeah.
you think and maybe this is not a great criticism of the show here, because maybe that is the stereotype of the Russian countryside, where you have a very big presence of the military in daily life, and
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true at all. I doubt it.
Yeah. I mean, they say that the brother-in-law whose home it is was a member of the militia, and that those were his friends, which explained their presence. But yeah, I mean, I think it's as balanced a portrayal as we were going to get. But
Hmm.
there's still obviously not like, do I think that the typical farmhouse in Russia, you walk in and there's two like dudes at the time, two dudes in uniform? I have no idea. But I kind of doubt it. my first one. All right, this might be unpopular, even with my co-host. I thought the ending was really sweet. I thought it was I thought it was lovely. I thought the singing was beautiful. I thought them switching back and forth and the promise of reconciliation and reattachment to family and just and love and the fact that we all are human. The humanistic message I found certainly appealing and consistent with my own ideals, and I enjoyed it. And that is simultaneously while recognizing that a lot of people are going to watch that and their eyes are going to roll up in their head and they're going to be really kind of
I'm
turned
one of
off
those
by it.
people.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah. No, and the reason why I don't like that is the same reason why. What was the movie? The third of Return of the King, the Peter Jackson Return of the King, where like you think the movie's over like 5 times and it's still not over and it just like keeps going.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience? And that's what I kind
Yeah.
of felt like. We had a resolution, and then we go out onto the docks, and then we have this cello singing fiasco.
It's counterpoint. It's a humanizing moment for Stringfellow. He's the only one that recognizes that she needs attention and human interaction. Right, the daughter. He goes out. He remembers. He's brilliant because he remembers the Russian song that he heard played once in a random farm on a completely different instrument, and he just nails it.
The Russian Yankee Doodle Dandy,
The
as it
Russian
were.
Yankee Doodle Dandy, as it were. I was going to leave that part out. All right. I'm trying.
Look, here's my counterpoint to that, John, which is I'm not sure that Stringfellow wasn't just trying to get in this girl's pants.
Oh, no. We're not. I strike that
I think he
from
was
the
trying
record.
to pick her up, man.
I strike
think he
that
went
from
out
the
there to
record.
like. I think he went out there with the cello, and he was like, "Look, lady, no, okay, niet,
No,
give
strike
me."
niet, big niet.
I'm not saying that he was. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that he wasn't like into her. You know,
She's how old is she, man? Like
she's in her 20s.
is
She's
she
like in her
okay?
20s. Yeah,
Yeah,
she's
yeah.
a
She just
grown woman.
she seemed. I guess my problem with that is she read really young to me. I maybe by her demeanor, like she seemed to be acting like a teenager to me.
Okay.
And I feel like that's why I reacted that strongly. But you're right. They do make a point of saying she's an adult, and but he doesn't like anybody like that. He can't love. She would die if he loved her. I mean,
It's true. If he fell in love with her, she would die.
yeah.
We know this.
So that doesn't work. All right. So what's your number two, buddy?
Well, I thought it was very interesting that we're talking about a biological weapon. And
Okay.
I don't know if it was ahead of its time because I imagine that in the 70s and 80s imaginations were very big and people understood the dangers of various pathogens and this sort of thing. But with everything that's going on in the world right now and the joke of the Russian position that Ukraine is using biological weapons or has labs of biological weapons, and that we've seen people go crazy about COVID or whether or not it's originally a biological weapon. I don't want to take any stand on any of that, like with the exception of the Ukraine thing, which I think it's a tragedy and just a downright terrorism on this part of the Russian state. But um, I just thought it was kind of ahead of its time in a way that this was the major concern. But I guess like we've already seen a lot of things like the Andromeda strain and this sort of thing in media
Yeah.
at this time by this time.
It's a growing fear. I mean, to balance out what you said earlier, like that, the sort of fear of that kind of thing justifies the war in Iraq, right? The WMDs, they're doing the
Mhm.
same sort of thing. That's so the Americans justified action, via the same sort of fear.
Attempted to justify.
Attempted, yes, attempted to justify. But yeah, I agree. I don't have anything to add. I do think it's an interesting topic. I think it's something to be remembered. It is certainly scary. I mean, and that's just sort of like we grew up, right? Like fear of everyone dying because something was going to come from the sky was just sort of like a part of like everyday life in the 80s. Like we had
Mhm.
drills that like the nuclear bomb was coming and like you hide under your desk as if like that's gonna do any bit of anything. Famously parodied on South Park. Just
Yeah, one interesting thing about the way this is written is that when Moses does his actual, I guess, theft of the serum,
yeah,
he essentially kills off
the
a whole
entire yeah
crew of scientists, of Russian scientists. I mean, think about the brain drain that Russia must have went through there. Like, imagine all your scientists who are working on your biological weapon just all die all at the same time. And he actually says that some of those guys were his friends.
yeah.
So,
That was
um,
I'm glad you brought that up. When he said that, that was sort of my clue that it was going to be a sort of more interesting and nuanced episode because like there was no like that's right I took him out kind of like attitude about it. It was like it
yeah.
sucked that I had to do this, but this stuff is so dangerous that I had to kill my own friends to get it away from the Russian state. So
Which is kind of an interesting trope, right? Where you have a scientist who's developing something very dangerous and needs to stop it somehow.
mhm.
Um, we saw it in Rogue One, for example, where he's developing the Death Star and he needs to somehow stop it. And
Yeah,
I wonder about where that really comes from. Is there really a real life example of maybe someone working on the Manhattan Project or something and deciding to try to sabotage it, or
yeah,
whatever the German or the Russian
yeah.
equivalencies of that would be. I don't know.
I think we could probably find historical examples of people who tried to do the right thing to some effect, and probably many who failed. But
Mhm.
I think at the very least, it's a clear wish fulfillment, right? Like you want, if you're a scientist and you like discovered, like you want to believe you're gonna do something to stop it, right? Like you want to believe you're not gonna like hand over the world-ending thing to like a random president. We have some recent examples that like maybe that's not the best plan. Whoever you want to pick, but it's I I would be worried. I
Yeah, and it's not like he's trying to stop it, for Russia from having the technology. He just wants to give America the technology so that they have a check on the Russian
well,
possibility of doing
yeah,
this.
and that's the part of the episode that is unexplored and would have been interesting, which is like, well, should we be giving this to the United States? You know, like this like clear, seemingly like undetectable super killian 10 seconds gas, like
2 seconds.
should should the United States, should anyone have this sort of thing? Like,
Right.
it does. I think that they're depending on the. Those are nice. Don't you can't just do that when I'm in the middle of talking, as if it's not going to completely derail me.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I have a new favorite thing. No, okay. I'm gonna go to my number two. I feel like we covered. My number two is what I called Moses and Santini, the philosophers. So I just really enjoyed several conversations between two like super gifted actors in the middle of this like 80s action show. Like this is two like Academy Award winning Broadway level actors just kind of like philosophizing to each other in this like great but sort of odd 80s show that we've decided to do a rewatch of. I'm just watching it going like, who's this dude? Like about Rick Lenz, the guy playing Moses. Like I had to go look him up. I was like, this guy's great. Like they're actually like having like this interesting back and forth, and like ideas are changing, and like he has real nuanced answers to like questions, and I loved every scene that those two had together.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to love? Talking about a philosophy in a primetime TV show in the 80s, which I think is really neat.
Yeah.
Part of my kind of I respect it and I enjoyed it, but for me that wasn't what the episode really was about in a way for me.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm watching an action show, to me it's about the nuts and bolts of the action.
Yeah.
And what this did for me was made me feel like the stakes weren't high enough. It made me feel like there wasn't a sense of urgency. I felt like they were really dilly-dallying in Sverdlovsk. I felt like they had a really time-sensitive mission, but then they got there and then it was like, let's hang out while we decide what we're going to do. And that
they were waiting for the soldiers to leave. So that's when they had the one conversation. Right? And then the soldiers, you're right, like, they explained every delay. But it is hard when you consider what we just talked about, which is like, this is some world-ending shit, right? That we have.
Right.
And we need to get out of here. Like, they even address it at one point when Stringfellow leaves to go get the helicopter. Moses assumes he's gone. He's like, the right thing for him to do is to get the hell out of here, right? To get that back to America. That's what he'll do. Now, that's sort of the story we're telling too, right? We're establishing that these guys are outliers. At another point in the episode, like, oh God, I forgot her name again. Morella, is talking to Archangel, and she's like, the odds are 1,000,000 to 1. It'll never work out. And he's like, well, good thing Hawk doesn't know the odds. You know, it's very Han Solo, right? Never tell me the odds. You know.
The odds of successfully navigating an asteroid field. Yeah, okay, got it.
So it's just like, it is. I think it's a little hero setup. I don't think it's. I enjoyed it. But you know, full faith and credit. I have a philosophy degree. Like I like all that stuff. Like, so for me, it's this happy surprise that they like have this sort of like, they slow down for a moment and have these like wonderful conversations. And for you, it's like, guys, tactically speaking, you're being morons. Like, what's happening?
What is why is this taking so long? We got to get going here. We got to move, guys. Come on, seriously though.
Yeah.
I mean, it was only a matter of time right before they were discovered. And we're not only talking about the serum here. We're talking about the ultimate avionics weapon in the world.
Yeah.
This Mach 1.1 helicopter, an Airwolf, which is sitting there with no armaments, just like hanging out in a field,
Yeah.
right?
And you're driving around with a
But
guy who keeps saying "we" when he's referring to Russians.
right, right. He's like, right. He keeps doing those little Freudian slips of what his allegiance is.
Yeah, but as far as the only thing we haven't covered that I liked, as far as the Santini dynamic, because it was that the conversation about all the we's and the conversation about him being Russian and American, and then I actually also referenced the part where he said they were my friends as sort of these really in-depth scenes. The one I don't have that came from the Dom side was when he was Moses was he thought his brother-in-law would never forgive him, right? He was like, "We're done. I'm never gonna know this guy again. I've lost this person that was important to me." And Dom was like very sweet, and whether or not you believe he was right, like he tried to bring comfort, right? He tried to make Moses feel as if there was hope, and I thought it was lovely, and I thought it was well done by the actors.
And there's that shot at the end where we see the brother-in-law kind of looking on as they're getting away. And I don't know. I think you could interpret that as good for you, kind of you did the right thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
But he was clearly not down with it at the get-go, but
yeah,
by the end he kind of lets them go. And I thought that was nice to see a transition in such a minor character. It's pretty cool.
yeah. And he accepts their choice if nothing else, right? I also thought, all right, buddy.
And my third thing really is I just read my note is what a sloppy operation. What a sloppy operation. And this is from the very beginning, right? So when Archangel and Morella are in the lodge, let's say, and strangely the dog is like looking up Morella's skirt and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." But when they're in the lodge, and presenting this plan, and then Stringfellow accepts it. Then Morella is in a helicopter with Archangel for a kind of extended dialogue scene while they're on their way to Kingsbridge, which is the name of the firm headquarters facility somewhere out in somewhere. And she's like, "Yeah, by the way, I ran this through the computers and this plan is shit." And Archangel's like, "Oh, okay," which to me was like so like. You need to speak up, lady. This is obviously not a good plan, and you think it's a terrible plan. And that's what was one of the sloppy things. And I think that also is in reference to how sloppy the writing is in a way in this particular part of this episode, which is a lot of the conflict and a lot of the attempt at drama that's generated here is through the exposition that Morella is giving.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we cut out her thing where she's like, "This is a terrible plan. He's got very low chance of success. This guy might be a Russian. He might have turned to be Russian." If you cut that part out of the equation, like Stringfellow and Dominic don't know the drama and don't understand the drama and aren't actively participating in it. As an audience member, when you're watching it, they're telling you this is dangerous, and they're showing you something else, right? Like Airwolf is flying over Finland, which oddly looks like, I don't know,
Nebraska.
Kansas? Yeah. So it's flying over Finland, and these MiGs are coming, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, we got to get lower," so he like dives lower, and Dominic is kind of like, "Oh, this is bad." Right?
Yeah.
We're 50 feet above the ground. We're gonna die. Please pull up.
What's
it was just very.
See,
Go ahead, John.
What's interesting is like I don't think it's a very tension-filled episode. I don't, but I blame those scenes more than I blame the construct. Like I think the construct worked. Like I don't think, like, the audience knowing more, I don't think is necessarily a problem. They're enough in it, right? And they know it's dangerous because they're going to Russia, right? Like, with a helicopter with no guns. Like, they know they're in for it. I think we could have explored more why they would do it, right? Like, there is no conversation of, like, this is super important. It's a killer drug. Like they just kind of go like, yeah, this. Okay, Archangel. I guess you're right about this. You know, like.
Like the encounter with the Migs doesn't actually change anything with the
No.
rest of the episode. So like if the encounter with the Mig doesn't do anything, then we don't need it. There is an axiom, I guess, in playwriting or screenwriting or what have you, that like each scene has to be necessitated by the story for it to exist.
This reminds me of our varied and then ultimately similar attitude about The Force Awakens, in that when it first came out, you were not positive about the movie, and I was like
Devastated.
I was like, no, listen, clearly not a whole story, but like they're gonna do two more, it's gonna be great, they're gonna finish the story. And then we ended up agreeing effectively because they just didn't do any of that.
You have a third point,
I have
sure.
a third point, but it's pretty related, and I think we can go past it pretty quickly. My favorite thing in the episode was, in fact, Rick Lenz's performance as Vladimir Moses Rostov. I thought he was excellent. I went and looked him up afterwards. He was discovered from a failed play on Broadway in like the 60s, and he was an understudy in Cactus Rose, which was a famous Broadway play, and then he was ultimately his big break in the movies was he was cast in the film version of that play, Cactus Rose, with Goldie Hawn. Had a prolific TV acting career through the 80s, 70s, and 80s. Just IMDb is like a mile long, and just like there have been some guest stars on this show, right? Like we've had Dr. Moffat, we've had the KGB guy from the episode of The Sun, Shannon Doherty, who actually is an example to go along Rick Lenz as like someone who like showed up on screen and you were immediately like, okay, something's going on here. I want to know this person. I want to see what they're going to say. I'm really just interested in their performance. So,
yeah, I mean, Lenz's performance, I would say, was nuanced.
We joke about Jan Michael Vincent, put him aside. Borgnine is an overqualified two for an 80s television show. So when you're bringing in good guest stars, like that's when I think we're going to see episodes just like hit the heights. Like, yeah. So this was the 80s.
It was the 80s, man.
It was the 80s, man.
And aside from the required Jeep hitting something and flipping in the air shot that you must have in all 80s action shows.
Literally, hold on. Literally in every episode of the A-Team. Every single episode. I used to watch for this when I was a kid because it fascinated me. Like, no matter what, every episode had a car. Boom, usually, boom.
And when that car does the flip, the Russians give up.
Well, it's very scary.
They see the flip and they're like, all right, well, we don't want to get flipped. So
yeah, well, he afterburner flipped them with a magic jet, with a magic helicopter. I mean, maybe they had a point, you know.
Jetacopter.
my easiest this in the 80s for this episode was that Russian soldiers apparently equal stormtroopers, equal basically any sort of like uniformed soldier in the 80s, G.I. Joe, anything, cannot shoot to save their life, and like everyone's aware of it. Like the good guys know they can't shoot, so they go with no urgency. Like you were so bothered by the lack of urgency in this episode, and this was the one time I was. Because Dom is acting like he's like a chauffeur getting people into a limo at like a prom. Like he's just like, hey guys, get on in.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird.
Russians are like, and he's just like, and he gets like, it was wild. But like, soldiers can't shoot straight in the 80s. That's where we are. And then this was a thing for the 80s. I will call it, I think it'll be a theme. It is kind of a theme of this show, technological exaggeration, right? And so Dom is sort of freaking out because they can't see, there's low light. And here's another kind of weird thing, because like Stringfellow doesn't turn it on right away, right? Like he kind of like, oh yeah, this is kind of scary and dark. Why don't you turn on the thing that lets me just be able to see?
The Starlight amplification system. Yes. He had an acronym for it. Yeah. But it's like, oh yeah, we got the Starlight amplification system. We can just turn that on. And he's like, oh wow, this is great.
And it increases the light by 1,000,000 times, which feels blinding to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but that seems.
I think it's a logarithmic scale. So when you get to 1,000,000, it's almost like it's like the difference between 100,000 times and a million times is very slight, but the
Oh,
difference between one time and two times is a
okay. Okay.
big
Yeah.
difference.
No.
So I'm going to explain that way because
Okay.
that's a logarithmic scale.
Head canon accepted. What's
No, I'm sorry. I'm getting my call time for tomorrow. I'm making a TV show tomorrow.
awesome?
Exciting.
You want to tell the
An
folks about
exciting
what you're doing, or can you?
No, I can't. It'll be
Ooh.
well, it's one of these things, you get the job, they don't tell you what you're doing. Um you, so this will be my fifth episode on this particular show.
Okay.
We've seen me around. I've done some things. I've said a couple of
Okay.
things, but I still don't quite understand what my character is doing
Are you
yet.
giving away too much information already? Well, considering we're probably not going to post this for a month, probably not. So that's fine.
No, I'm not giving anything away because we're not talking about anything specific, but it's just it's so secretive. I have like when they send me my assignment, basically my part of the script, it's just the pages or page that I'm on. It doesn't include any other part of the script. So I haven't. There's another 50 pages, 60 pages of this script that I have no idea what's going on.
You have
in
no
that script.
context for what the hell's going on around you. And
None.
do you think that would have been a typical experience for Airwolf guest stars?
No, I don't think so. I think look, I'm what the tier that I'm at is called the co-star tier. It's a little bit
Okay.
different, right?
Okay.
So like Rick Lenz is going to come in. He's what you call a TOS, top of show,
Okay.
right? So he's a TOS credit. When you're top of show, you're given different uh, information. It's a different level of negotiation. For
Okay.
me, I'm end credits. I'm
Okay.
end credit guy. So until I'm top of show, which will happen, I'm just experiencing the ambiguity that bit players kind of live in. I'm not really a bit player. I'm a recurrent character, but it's still very ambiguous to me.
So like maybe more akin to in this episode what like the daughter went through, the actress portraying the daughter or the brother-in-law, like sort of their experience, like
you may not get a lot of context as to what's going on. I mean, chances are you don't.
I mean, that's got to increase the difficulty in performing well. Like you don't how do you decide how to react to stimuli if you don't know like what's been going on before or after?
Well, that's part of what the audition process is about, right?
Okay.
You're given an audition that's going to indicate to casting and producers what kind of choices you're going to make. And that's I guess if you want to think about it in this way, it's the creative work of the actor, which is to say, I'm going to make an interpretation, I'm going to go with it. Sometimes it feels like a guessing game.
Yeah. And
are you mad right now? Are you excited right now? What are you trying to do right now? How do you feel about what's happening right now? So you kind of have to come up with a logical explanation that you think is going to fit the scene and just go with it. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not right. I think.
Have you ever had an experience where like you got a job, you were going with a thing, and then when you got on set, the director was like, "I need you to do this completely different than what I hired you for"?
Yes.
Okay.
So there was a show called Happy with Christopher Maloney, and I had auditioned for like several parts of the show. Like I auditioned for the pilot, I auditioned for like episode 3, I auditioned for episode 5, and then finally they're like, I get this audition, and I think it's a terrible audition, right? And I get the job, and I show up on set, and the showrunner is there, and he says, "Oh, Paul, you're here! I'm so glad you're here, guys. It's Paul Bomba." I'm like, what the hell is going on right now, right? So he's like,
"Oh no!"
So I had an idea about what I was supposed to do, and I was doing it, And he's like, all right, cut. And he comes over to me. He's like, "Look, I think we need a little context for what's going on here because I feel like you're a little confused." And I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm totally confused. I'm no idea what's going on."
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, well, but it's fine. It worked out. Anyway, we're getting way off the rails here, but
yeah, but I do think some of this is interesting. This is an insight you can offer, but we're about done. And then we're going to sign off, folks. So that's going to be me. Please like and subscribe. My name is John, also known as DorkLovesSports.
My name is Paul Bomba. Like and subscribe.